What is up, guys? Dzeeff here, and it's been a few days. I took a couple days off and I want to play some video games that just came out. I played Spider-Man Miles Morales, which was fantastic. I mean, beautiful game, great cast of characters, lots of fun. And also I played Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, which mostly just reminded me that I liked Warzone a lot more than old school Call of Duty multiplayer. In today's video, we're looking at Dark Synchro Monsters from the Yu-Gi-Oh! 5D's anime. Now, these things were never playable in the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG, but many of them were printed as regular Synchro Monsters, and in today's video I want to take a look at how those cards actually went in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Metagames. I will say here the Dark Synchro Monsters were a very cool idea. I guess they're available in some of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Tag Force video games, but basically you would have a high-level tuner monster, a dark tuner monster, and then you would subtract its level from a non-tuner monster to make a negative leveled sort of dark synchro monster, which was pretty interesting. We eventually did get cards that do look pretty similar to dark synchros. Xyz monsters also have that same black border, a little bit different but pretty similar. Anyway, in today's video we're going to look at all the dark synchro monsters that they printed from the anime as real synchro monsters and talk about if they made a competitive impact. First up, let's look at Zman the Ape King, which requires one dark tuner plus one non-tuner beast type monster. It is a beast earth synchro monster, and I do want to mention here with many of these cards, the materials for them are based off of what players were able to summon them with in the anime. About half of these make sense, where the non-tuner monsters type has to be the same type as the synchro monster itself, but in some of the other cases you'll see some really weird combinations, but we'll talk about those in a few minutes. This card has 2,500 attack points and 1,800 defense, and it says if this card attacks, your opponent cannot activate any spell or trap cards until the end of the damage step. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can select that monster and send one monster from your hand or your side of the field to the graveyard to negate that attack. So it's sort of like an Arachnid. It doesn't stop monster effects, but also it has a bonus effect where it blocks attacks. Unfortunately though, this card never really saw a ton of competitive play. Back in 2010, this card was featured in two topping Lightsworn Monarch deck lists, which did play a lot of random beast monsters. I'm not sure how often this card was actually summoned, but at least it was featured in those decks. I think even in comparison to the other dark synchro monsters, this is one of the worst ones. The summoning requirement of this card is way too specific for not enough of a payoff. One of the issues that you'll see with many of these cards is that this card does specifically require you to use only one non-tuner monster. If you really wanted to, especially nowadays with all the synchro summoning support that we've gotten over the years, you could build a deck that would fairly easily find ways to summon Zman the Ape King pretty reliably. However, there's no real reason to, especially nowadays, but even back in the day when this card was initially released, there was no reason to build the deck using this card because pretty much every other level 7 synchro monster was better than it even 10 years ago. Next up, we have a card that I feel actually has a lot of potential. It really hasn't seen that much play, but I think the effect is fairly decent. The tricky part is its summoning conditions, as is the case with many of these cards. Underground Arachnid is a level 6 earth insect synchro monster that takes one dark tuner plus one non-tuner insect type monster. No surprises there. This thing has 2,400 attack points and 1,200 defense, and it says if this card attacks, your opponent cannot activate any spell or trap cards until the end of the damage step, the exact same effect as Zman the Ape King so far. Once per turn, you can select one face-up monster your opponent controls and equip it to this card. If this card would be destroyed by battle, you can destroy the monster equipped to this card by its effect. Instead, you can only equip one monster at a time to this card. Already, I mean, just by comparison here, this card is so much better than Zman the Ape King. You don't have some random attack blocking effect, you have a legitimate effect on this card, sort of like Relinquished, and I think that actually is pretty good. Really, the only thing keeping this card back from being played, even in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, is that it's way too hard to summon. There simply are not that many insect type decks out there, and it's pretty tough actually finding a deck that can reliably summon Underground Arachnid. Yes, you could just build a deck with a bunch of dark tuner monsters and insect monsters to make this card, but you need something else. However, if there ever is a deck where you have a lot of cards that could potentially make this thing, I would expect it to actually see a lot of play. It's worth noting that in the past, the one top that this card had where someone was actually summoning it was in Insectors, which makes sense, right? They have a lot of insect monsters with level modulation effects, so I can see that combination kind of working. Konami let us vote on a new piece of support for an existing Yu-Gi-Oh deck, and Insectors won the poll with a new spell card, so maybe if we see Insectors actually being played, and maybe if they use tuner monsters, we might actually see Underground Arachnid in competitive play. Before we look at the real version of 100 Eyes Dragon, I want to take a moment here and look at the Dark Synchro version, and this is the only card in the video I want to do this for, and it's because this is one of the most broken cards I have ever seen, even by Yu-Gi-Oh anime standards. In the anime, this card had two crazy effects. First off, this card gains the effects of all dark monsters in your graveyard. Now, logistically speaking, that would be very difficult to print on a Yu-Gi-Oh card, but if it was printed on a real Yu-Gi-Oh card, it would obviously be very broken and probably be the cause of many FTKs. The second effect, if your opponent does manage to get rid of this thing, when this card is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, select one card from your deck and add it to your hand. So it just lets you search whatever the heck you want, which is obviously very overpowered. The version of 100 Eyes Dragon that was printed in the TCG format is not this crazy. However, it is probably the most successful Dark Synchro monster that was translated into the real game for a couple different reasons. 100 Eyes Dragon is a level 8 Dark Dragon Synchro monster with 3000 attack and 2500 defense. It takes one Dark Tuner plus one or more non-tuner Fiend type monsters. That is actually very crucial, by the way, because one of the most common ways that people were summoning 100 Eyes Dragon was in Infernities using Infernity Avenger, Infernity Archfiend, and Infernity Necromancer. If this card had the same restriction as many of the other Dark Synchros do, where you have to use only one non-tuner monster, it probably would not have been played at all. So what does this thing do? Well, it says once per turn you can banish one level 6 or lower dark effect monster from your graveyard until the end phase. This card's name becomes that banish monsters, and replace this effect with that banish monster's original effects. If this card is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, add one Earthbound Immortal monster from your deck to your hand. So obviously this thing has been nerfed in a few ways. It can only copy one dark monster per turn, and also it has to only copy a level 6 or lower dark monster, and also when it's destroyed you don't get to add any card. It has to be an Earthbound Immortal monster, which obviously is not very good because Earthbound Immortals have never really been a competitive deck. That being said, 100 Eyes Dragon was played a lot in Infernities, so you would summon it in the way that I just described with Avenger, Necromancer, and Archfiend, and then you would use this card to copy Infernity Mirage from your graveyard to special summon more Infernities to the field. Despite being heavily nerfed from the anime version, this card still saw tons of competitive play. The ability to copy Infernity Mirage or any level 6 or lower dark monster was very valuable, and even in modern Yu-Gi-Oh we've seen this type of effect be very broken. So with like Supreme King Dragon Starving Venom, which could copy a graveyard monster's effect, that was extremely broken in the Pendulum FTK deck, and it got the card banned. While many Dark Synchro monsters were not actually played in the Yu-Gi-Oh TCG once they were made into regular Synchro monsters, 100 Eyes Dragon did see tons of success and truly was a very competitive card that was very good in the anime as well. Next up we have Moon Dragonquilla, a level 6 Dark Synchro monster that's a dragon that has 2500 attack points and 2000 defense. The summoning requirements for this card are specifically Supe, so this one does require a specific tuner, plus one or more non-tuner monsters, which means that in some ways it's easier to summon this card because it requires any non-tuner monsters, not anything specific, but in other ways it's more difficult because it does require you to play Supe, which is not a very good monster. If this card is targeted for an attack, gain life points equal to half the attacking monster's attack. If this card on the field is destroyed, you can target one Sun Dragon Inti in your graveyard, special summon that target. The Sun Dragon, by the way, has an effect where if it's destroyed, you can special summon Moon Dragonquilla from your graveyard during the next standby phase. The idea here is pretty straightforward. You summon both of them and you try to cycle through their revival effects and eventually gain enough advantage to maybe win the duel. Sun Dragon is a lot better than Moon Dragon, and that makes sense. It's level 8, not level 6, but even with these cards having pretty cool effects of reviving each other over and over and over again, the monsters that you have to use to summon them, the Supay and Fire Ant, are just really bad, so you wouldn't want to play them in any of your decks. Kind of randomly, these cards actually did get support like a year ago in Legendary Duelist Immortal Destiny, and now you actually have a lot of super easy ways to summon either one of these Synchros. Even with that new support though, the Synchros are just not enough by modern standards to be competitively viable, so sadly the deck never really saw competitive play. Frozen Fitzgerald is a level 5 water fiend monster with 2500 attack and defense. It's kind of funny here that this thing has better stats than like most of the cards that we've looked at, despite being the lowest leveled card so far. This takes 1 Dark Tuner plus 1 non-tuner beast type monster. If this card attacks, your opponent cannot activate any spell or trap cards until the end of the damage step. We've seen that effect before. When this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard while you control no monsters, you can discard 1 card to special summon this card from the graveyard in face up defense position. That's not terrible. It's not great, but it's not terrible either, and I'll tell you why. It's not a once per turn effect, so it's not once per turn, which means you could do it over and over and over again to block a whole bunch of your opponent's attacks. Now obviously by modern standards that's not super relevant, but back in the day it wasn't like the worst effect imaginable. I think you can even imagine here by modern standards, if this card had a negation effect or a relevant effect while on the field, this wouldn't be the worst card ever. I mean, it actually might be fairly decent. The ability to revive itself over and over again is pretty cool, but it needs an effect on the field that your opponent wouldn't want you to have, so that your opponent is obligated to get rid of it, therefore triggering the graveyard effect. As it stands right now though, yeah, not that great of a card, but it does have a lot more potential than some of the other cards that we've looked at in today's video. Next up we have Dark Diviner, which probably is the card on the list that while it didn't see that much play, it was the card that I saw the most amount of people experimenting with trying to make it work, and I'll explain that in just a moment. Dark Diviner is a level 4 Dark Fiend Synchro monster with 2000 attack and 1000 defense, and it takes 1 Dark Tuner plus 1 non-tuner insect type monster. This card cannot be destroyed by battle. When this card declares an attack, if the attack of the attack target is higher than this card, the attack of the attack target becomes equal to this face-up card's current attack. This change sticks around until the end of the battle phase. When this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, send the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck to the graveyard. So basically, this card can crash with anything that your opponent might have, and it mills 3, which is kind of good, kind of bad. This thing though, the real reason people talked about it was that you could summon it very easily with Junk Synchron. All you had to do was summon Junk Synchron and bring back Level Eater, an insect monster, and instantly you could make Dark Diviner. Was that the best use for those 2 cards? Not necessarily, but it wasn't the worst use. You would also see this card sometimes in shooting Quasar Dragon decks because you would often already be playing Junk Synchron and Level Eater, and sometimes you could use this and a level 6 Synchro monster and Formula Synchron to make shooting Quasar Dragon. Finally, we have Dark Flattop, and I will say here, the reason I put this card last is because I don't want a bunch of ruling questions in the comment section below. So Dark Flattop is a level 8 Dark Machine Synchro monster with 0 attack and 3000 defense. It takes 1 Dark Tuner plus 1 or more non-tuner machine type monsters. Once per turn, you can target 1 reactor monster or Flying Fortress Skyfire in your graveyard, special summon that target ignoring its summoning conditions. If this card is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon 1 level 5 or lower machine type monster from your hand. Where is the confusion here? Well, the confusion here comes from the reviving Flying Fortress Skyfire. I think a lot of the people that have tried to make a deck deck with Dark Flattop have built a Lightsworn deck, and the idea there is that you could mill the Skyfire and then revive it with Dark Flattop. Is that combo like broken or anything along those lines? No, but it's kind of funny and it's a cool way to summon Skyfire. But then they would summon Dark Flattop and be like, why won't it let me revive the Skyfire in the graveyard? You see, the tricky part here is that even though Dark Flattop does ignore the summoning conditions of the card that it is reviving, you do have to summon the Skyfire properly first to actually be able to revive it. I know that is confusing, but that's just how the ruling has always worked, so this card is pretty much useless. If you were allowed to summon the Skyfire without summoning it properly first, maybe this card would have been good in a meme deck back in the day, but as it stands right now, it'll pretty much never be viable because no one in their right mind would ever try to summon Skyfire using the real method. Anyway though, that is all of the Dark Synchros that were featured in the anime that got printed as real Yu-Gi-Oh! Synchro monsters. I hope you guys enjoyed today's discussion. I will say there were two other Dark Synchros that I guess were printed as real cards, but they were only featured in the manga, so if you guys want me to review those in a future episode, let me know in the comment section below. Anyway, I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.